high enough, but I think we can go now.
Awesome.
Yes, we're live.
Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of LibertyCon Africa. It's indeed a remarkable time to be alive as an African, especially if you've been following the events across the continent, from Nigeria to Mali to Ethiopia to Zimbabwe. The reinforced calls for social, political, and in fact, institutional changes across Africa are indeed events that will make you proud as an African. And today we have on our hands a topic that is very much related to what's going on across Africa, politics-wise. And the topic is an investigation, an inquiry of the democratic process in Africa. Can we say the changes we've seen recently, the call for changes, or the problems emanating across the continent are indeed linkable to the democratic process? As democracy work in Africa, has it worked? If it has, what are the proofs? And if it hasn't, what are the ways through which we can improve our democracy? And joining me today to help make sense of what's going on across the continent, particularly the democratic process, are 4 amazing individuals. Free Asanga, the Chief Operating Officer at Uncafu Policy, also at the Denise and Lenora Foundation in Cameroon. Rejoice Ngwenya, the founder of Comaliso, the Coalition for Market and Liberal Solutions in Zimbabwe. Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. And Aliu Bangura, an IT consultant and researcher at CFAR in, I think, somewhere in Eastern Africa. But again, it's just an amazing array of panelists, and I'm so excited to have them today. We're in fact lucky to have these 4 individuals. And I want to go straight to the point. But before I go straight to the point, I want to encourage everybody to keep their questions in the comment section and make it short. But at the same time, mute your audio if you're on Zoom so that we can have a very good transmission and conversation. So first of all, I want to ask Free, if you can hear me, Free. In the 1990s, particularly in the late 1990s, we saw a reinforced call by Americans, by Europeans, particularly the United Kingdom and France, stating that democracy will indeed usher changes in Africa. You know, during the 1990s, we had these military coups from Nigeria to Togo to Ghana. Everywhere in Africa was boiling up with military coups, fire everywhere. And the West said, democracy will save us. So until Africa embraced democracy, it will remain stagnant. And indeed, we embraced democracy in the 2000s. But about 30 years or 25 years later, we've seen that there are now calls for a reshuffle of our democracies, so to speak, or an abolition of our democracies, and perhaps going into new political structures, or structuring rather. So Free, do you think democracy since the 2000s has failed in Africa, or has Africa failed democracy?
Thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Before I dive into the subject matter, I want us to first of all understand the term democracy. Democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. So here we are talking of power of the people. And suffice it to know that democracy is a foreign concept imposed to Africans. Before then, Africans had their own way of government and systems of government. Now, to impose democracy into Africa without taking into consideration the realities or the context in which this democracy has to be implemented, to me, is the beginning of the problem that we are facing today with the democratic process in Africa. One of the things that comes to light when we look at democracy in Africa is that part of the problems that we face is as a result of problem of identification. Identification because regimes in Africa that were dictatorial monarchies maintain part of that in association with foreign democracy. So we have different forms. Now, we in Africa also have a heritage, a colonial heritage, whereby created without taking into consideration the ethnicity and the unity of the people. Now, lack of this national integration that we find in most of the states, African states today, is also another cause for the that we are finding with the democratic process. For example, when people don't find a common ground, a common identity, it is difficult to instill democratic values in them. We have to understand that there must be systems in place for democracy to strive. And that is part of the problem that we find today. Most of our governments have embraced democracy. As you rightly said, it was imposed on us, it was brought to us, and we saw the values in it. But what we lack is also the political vision on how to go about it. Some governments think that they can legislate democracy. It is not possible because the elements that have to make democracy work need to be in place before democracy can strive in Africa.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Free. I want to come to you, Rejoice. So you had Free made mention of the problem of political identification or policy identification. Certainly, we had our own political systems across Africa before colonialism. Of course, you know, there were acephalous societies. Some are quite centralized. There were purely anarchic societies. Even the monarchical systems that existed in West Africa or some part of Eastern Africa, you know, where the type of monarchies that were restricted by what we can classify or categorize as constitutionalism, you know, virtual constitutionalism, conventional constitutionalism, people having an understanding that the king cannot go beyond this this level in exercising his power. And if it does, there are checks and balances among councils that will, of course, put those excesses in check. Of course, Free have highlighted that, but I want to ask you, Rejoice, you are a very big critic of the democratic process in Zimbabwe, especially in Southern Africa. And we've seen a quite remarkable change in the democratic process in that part of Africa, particularly since the end of apartheid. And many will say you can't really compare the maturity in the democratic process in South Africa or Southern Africa to, for instance, Western Africa. Do you think, Rejoice, that there is any remarkable or any difference between the way democracy is practiced in South Africa to the way it is practiced in West Africa? Or are we just across board suffering from the same mediocrity and absurdity of democracy?
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining the platform, and I'm very pleased to be a part of this debate, Ibrahim. Now, obviously, I will differ slightly with Free's, contextualization of the evolution of governance, because what really surprises me, Ibrahim, about Africans is that when it comes to other matters of social and economic significance, the motor car, the internet, air travel, we normally take those things, Ibrahim, as universal tools of convenience, right? We even television, everything seems to be perfectly adaptable, entertainment and so forth. Until we start talking about power, politics and power. This is where the authoritarian, sentimentality around nationalism begins to try and split hairs and say, Africans were like this during the monarchical years, centuries. We have got our own way of understanding things, our own tradition and culture, only because we are simply saying democracy is about power from the people, not to the people, not with the people, from the people. So whenever you begin to want to demand African leaders to be accountable beyond the electoral cycle, then they begin to start evoking certain normative, descriptions of how democracy should be and how it has been imposed on us. And I'm standing here saying, if the Zimbabwean government is accepting that there is an evolution towards a global, economy, a global, mode of doing things. We are members of the United Nations, we are members of SADC, we are members of AU, and we have accepted that Zimbabwe is part of the global cultural movement. And this cultural movement, Ibrahim, comes with everything. It comes with systems of governance. It comes with exports. It comes with trade. It comes with international financial protocols. So to me, democracy becomes much more than just governing. Now, our contextualization, therefore, remains basically about a 5-year electoral cycle. So Mnangagwa is going to tell you that because there is this perpetuation of the electoral cycle every 5 years, then there must be something democratic about our governance. Now, my answer is totally, there is no democracy. Africans do not understand. They've perverted, they've adulterated democracy purely for the benefit of the ruling class. So I've stopped accepting, Ibrahim, that Africans have certain ways of looking at things that are traditional, and anything that comes with a Westminster type of setup is very Western. It has been posed on. That, to me, does not work. We are part of the global movement. There is an evolution in the democratic systems in the world. We must be part of it. And if it desires that power comes from the people, separation of power, take the cities, separate political party processes from the executive and parliamentary systems and judiciary, then we're home and dry. If you're afraid of implementing those systems, Ibrahim, then you're perverting, you're being a hypocrite. You're taking in everything from the West, and you're being selective. So to me, that is selective ignorance, Ibrahim.
Absolutely, Rejoice. I mean, I agree with you. You can't expect the people to perfectly understand a foreign political system. I mean, it is not to say that democracy never existed in Africa, or a form of democracy never existed in Africa prior to colonialism, but we had our own unique democratic system. But you bring this westernized democratic system and you expect a people to embrace it and not to have problems. Well, certainly that's not going to work. But I want to come to you, Aliyu. Well, Rejoice made mention of one thing that power emanates from the people. Well, certainly the people are the embodiment of power, and whatever the people want should be what happens in politics. But certainly in Africa, that's not often the case. But I want to ask you, Aliyu, many have questioned the protest in Nigeria, in Mali, in Zimbabwe, certainly, calling them unconstitutional. That, okay, there was elections recently in those countries. There were elections, rather. You people voted, but again, you voted, but somebody came in, and two years later or some months later, you in the street protesting, saying you do not want that person. Well, that's unconstitutional. Why can't you just wait for the next election to exercise your mandates? Why go flood the street with protest? Why can't you just wait for the next election? So, Ali, I want to ask you: do you think it's indeed wrong for Africans to always, flood the streets a year, 2 years after elections, or demanding for change? Or should we just leave this government to work out their 4 or 5 years in power and vote them out to the next election? Ali, what do you think of this protest and this counter argument against such protests? Free, can you help us answer that question pending the time Ali responds?
Okay, thank you. I think that if we go back to the definition, to the layman's definition of democracy, that it's a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Once any element of this equation is taken away, then there is need for the people to request for something or for a change in anything. Most often, what plagues Africa, or if I use the case of Cameroon as an example, is that we have a multiplicity of political parties in the country. And so when it comes to elections, voting is based on different lines and not on a political agenda. It's either based on ethnic alliances, religious alliances, and all the like. And when it comes now to implementing these policies, there is a problem. So the people now feels that the government is not working for them, is working against them, is not providing what they were elected to. They have to come out and advocate for change. Now, the measures in which they use to advocate for is another issue to debate about, but there is a genuine concern when the government is not working for the people. Because if we are talking about democracy, then the government has to work for the people. So that is my take on the issues of protest across Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the line of thought Rejoice was expressing, but I'm seeing a little confusion here. Rejoice, we agree with Free that the democratic process in Africa hasn't really worked for the people, and in fact those protests on the streets are justified. Because I really want us to clarify the question of protest versus election here. Not many will agree that protests are needed when in fact there was an election recently, or there will be an election in the next 2 years. So Rejoice, we agree to that.
Well, basically, I do agree, Ibrahim, because once your constitution, because the constitutional making process is a collective national item. It's a national agenda, and when you sit around and decide as citizens and leaders that the constitution allows citizens to express themselves if they are dissatisfied about a particular process. And mind you, a demonstration, a protestation is an expression of a deficit of something, right? Okay. There's always problems in the world, but once you agree as a country that your constitution is one that defines the limits of your expression, I think it's also important for our leaders to appreciate that there is nothing that should come in the way of Africans expressing themselves in the street. Okay, you might be talking about violence and so forth, but of course that is the maturity that we are saying. As we grow as Africans in our democratic discourse and understanding, we will begin to tolerate each other more. Now, the Mnangagwa formula that as long as they are protesting against him, he's going to bring the army onto you. It means that he doesn't understand democracy, because democracy says, let the people say what they want to say. If you don't understand what they're gonna say through petitions and the legal system, they are going to go into the streets, and there are ways of protecting property in the street. So really, I do agree with Free, and of course, that it is important that once the constitutional provisions are specific and they've laid the boundaries of our expression, they should be respected.
Right. So Ali, I understand you are on the line again. I want you to, just choose which side you are, if you agree with both Free and Rejoice. So do you think protests are equally good ways to bring about social change or political change as elections? Of course, one is enshrined. I mean, both protests and elections are well constitutional expressions of personal opinion. But I'm just saying, we've seen a remarkable amount of criticism against this protest in Zimbabwe, to Mali, to Nigeria. That why can't people just wait for the elections? And as a matter of fact, you have opposition figures leading these protests, and governments have called them agents of disruption, fueled or promoted by the opposition party. So Ali, do you agree that we should pursue protests as much as we do pursue our expression in elections?
All right, thank you very much. First of all, my apologies for the interruption, and second of all, I would just like to clarify that I'm not from East Africa. I am actually from West Africa, not too far from Nigeria, and from the Gambia, to be more specific. Yes, can you hear me? Sorry.
Ali, we're having difficulty in getting you clearly. I want to ask you if you can. I mean, of course, there'll always be internet problem. Maybe you can disable your video and join us via audio so we can have a better connection.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but can you deactivate your video? That should make it better.
Right.
All right,
Yes.
let's give it a
Can
try.
you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Right, thank you very much. I was saying, I started by apologizing for the interruption earlier. And second of all, I just wanted to clarify that I'm actually from West Africa, not too far from Nigeria, so in the Gambia to be precise. And yes, the issue of protest, we've seen around 2011 to 2012, there about the Arab Spring and how it was crucial to bringing about change in those countries. And moving forward, the elections per se have not really done the job enough in Africa in most countries, and that is usually why
we're having extreme difficulty in getting you clearly. I think my colleagues will work with you to fix that audio problem. But in the meantime, I want to come back to Rejoice and Free. So many analysts have criticized this calls for change in Zimbabwe and elsewhere, and calling them sort of whack-a-mole game, like you just killing one tree. I mean, there's a bushfire, right? And you just putting down one fire on one tree at a time. Why can't you just attack the fire as a whole? We're just saying, okay, it's human rights violation in Zimbabwe today. We're gonna protest that. It's stupid economic policies tomorrow in Zimbabwe. We're gonna protest that. Today is NEPA or PHCN or electricity problem in Nigeria. We're gonna protest. Tomorrow is SARS. We're gonna protest. Why can't we just attack all these problems at a go? Why can't Nigerians just demand for a holistic change in governance? Why can't we demand for an absolute change in constitution, particularly constitution? Why can't Zimbabweans, question ZANU-PF and the opposition to bring about a constitutional change? For instance, Nigeria's constitution is still dates back. I mean, it dates back to the 1999. It was drafted in 1999. That was about more than 21 years ago now. Zimbabwe's constitution, majority of its content, I think, comes from the 1980s. The same thing as Rwanda. Rwanda's constitution is majorly made up of elements from 1991 after the Arusha Peace Agreement, and this resonates across Africa. We're seeing, constitution drafted under the military regime, or constitution that emerged as a consequence of civil wars. Well, this is 2020. Things has changed, and people are not the same as they were in 1999. Certainly not. So why can't we see these problems as constitutional problems rather than as police brutality problem or economic problems or leadership or corruption problems? Do you guys not think that constitution is the bedrock problem in Africa? Rejoice.
Well, look, a constitution is just as good as the people that are going to implement it. And we have gone probably, Ibrahim, through about 3 or 4 constitutional making processes where we reach a consensus. I think, as I said earlier on, while as long as we reach a consensus, because it doesn't matter how perfect. Look at the American Constitution; it's very clear. But you can see the behavior of Donald Trump is slightly, divergent. It's slightly skewed, because of the way that perhaps he applies the executive authority, provision. So my submission, Ibrahim, it's really not about the constitution. Look, even the United Kingdom does not have a constitution. They use statutes. Free talked about our traditional governance system. We didn't have constitutions. Most of it was oral and moral authority. So really, it's not going to be possible, Ibrahim, to emerge with a perfect constitution and then you demand its wholesome, implementation. Our last constitutional making process, Ibrahim, was in 2013, and I was there. I was in the top 4 individuals that were responsible for doing the final draft. This current government of authoritarian militarism of Mnangagwa, they have no interest in even adhering to the constitution they subscribe to. It's just basic. So it's not really about our inability to interpret constitution. It's the character and the nature of leaders that are important. So it's not going to happen. We're not going to come up with a perfect constitution. What we need is individuals that are willing to be more compassionate when it comes to the matters of governance.
Okay, so Free, you hear what Rejoice just said. I think the judge doesn't really see constitution as a basic problem, even though I will see constitution as a primary problem, because guess what? in America, Donald Trump is being kept from going absolutely irate because of the Constitution. In even in the UK, when they have where they have virtually unwritten Constitution, their convention or customs still guide principles. Boris Johnson can't go beyond some conventions. But again, I want to ask you, Free, do you think Constitution is a foundational problem, as I suggest, or will you go with Rejoice to say it's really not the problem? You know, the leaders are the problem.
I think I'll go with Rejoice, because if you look at the African countries, you have some very beautiful constitutions. Everything is enshrined in the Constitution. Every democratic principle, rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of association, everything is enshrined in our Constitution. Now it comes to the political will to implement whatever is enshrined in the Constitution, because the political place would definitely want to safeguard powers. And so in the interpretation or the implication of the Constitution, it is not the same as what is in. I'll take, for example, our Constitution talks of separation of powers, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. In practice, it is not the case. So when we look at the Constitution in isolation, it is okay. When we look at the regime in place, that is where the problem comes in, and that is the origin of the protest. And one thing I'd like to say, and to say why the Constitution, is that most of the protest arises because of lack of giving a listening ear to the people. When policies are in place that do not serve the people, and people want to talk about it, the regimes don't want to talk. They don't want to listen to the people, to sit back and address the issues. They don't want to talk. And it is the final frustration that pushes the populace to go out and protest in the streets. Right. If we look at protests all across Africa, they follow almost the same pattern.
Right. Still, I'm not giving in. I still believe the Constitution is a great problem, because guess what? I'm going to come to the chat box, but I want to make my point. So you have these constitutions drafted in 1990s or 1980s, and many of them, you know, were drafted not with great consideration for minority rights, for instance. Many of them, they have elements that do not perfectly reflect new realities or new economic or social realities in Africa. For instance, Nigeria's 1999 constitution was drafted by the military, and life has remarkably changed in Nigeria. Then our population has increased. You know, there are new constituents or constituencies rather, and all this are not put into consideration back then. So why can't we modify this constitution, or that constitution rather, to reflect new changes? Even your country, Free, the constitution in Cameroon doesn't necessarily take into great deep consideration the rights of minorities, like, you know, the Anglophones in your country, and you want to question if these are true representation of our realities, or they are just you know, incomplete documents in the hands of elected representative, whom of course cannot, you know, lead without a complete document. So I want to read some comments from the chat box. We have here from Selina Apinde. She says, Selina from Kenya, I believe that the constitution is not the primary problem, but the implementers are. Patrick Bayi, public protest sometimes is really good because it brings out the hidden truth in the limelight. There are a lot of oppressions that people faces, but it adds a little attention in the public. Many unjust things happening in the dark, and also when all peaceful means to amend these situations are blocked, making it known to the populace is one way forward in minimizing those social unjust attitudes. Keep your questions and comments coming in on YouTube and of course on Zoom. I want to read two more here from Freeman Musikambesa. No statutory instruments can guarantee a democratic society. What it does is that it gives a moral obligation for the office bearers. It gives a guide on the manner and direction in which events will be partaken. So a constitution with willingness is beyond guaranteeing a free society. I think I have one supporter right there. And lastly, from Monina Farmer, she says, or he says, that there should be a constitutional review. Well, I agree with that. So keep your questions coming and comments, and I'm going to read them out, momentarily. So Aliyu, I think Aliyu has a good connection, a better connection now. I just want to make I just want to have our audience understand your position on the issue of protest versus elections, and if constitution is indeed our problems or the leaders. Ali, if you want to make that point in 1 minute.
All right. Thank you very much. Is it clear enough now?
Yes, please proceed.
All right. Thank you again. Yes, we would ordinarily have receive backlash from government and government supporters, obviously regarding protest of any kind. But we've seen how it worked in during the Arab Spring, and then where election never did the trick. It was able to and so there was regime change. So yes, violent protest to a certain extent is what the excuse would be, that protest is out of the question, or it's bad, and there will be a lot of resistance from government and government forces to ensure that it doesn't take off to begin with. But it has worked in other countries, and without it, we would still have the dictators that we used to have 10, 15 years ago in the Arab world and some of the other places that you mentioned, because Zimbabwe as well, used to have a very African president that would as it were, and then if not for protest, we still would have been dealing with such leaders. Notwithstanding, though, I don't just feel that democracy is the best system. Yes, there won't be a best system in the, as we would want, but then democracy itself, not just with the African side of it, where we would be afraid that it would just be an opportunity to promote authoritarianism. That aside, though, I feel like even with where it came from, it's not working. So it definitely is not the system that is best for us.
I mean, you're right, Aliyu. Even the ancient Greeks that we often categorize or recognize as the progenitors of democracy, Aristotle once said that democracy is the most stupid form of government. And even in America today, they're having constitutional crisis because their democracy is not perfect. Certainly, there cannot be a perfect democracy. But I'm going to come to another line of thought. But before that, I want to read a very interesting comment here in the comment section on Zoom from Richard David. It says constitutional changes are okay, but if you have multi-party politics in the parliament, then changes are likely to favor the people in government. Like in Uganda, during the constitutional reforms, the opposition had good points blocking the changes, but the final decision was made by voting the ruling party, with many members of parliament won automatically. The changes were made without consulting the people even. So according to me, constitutional changes are defending the people in parliament. They never favor liberty and democracy. I absolutely subscribe to that view, Richard. I mean, many of the times our elected representatives in Africa, not only in Africa, everywhere, often promote their own interest, and particularly the interest of lobbyists, interest of big corporations, and not necessarily interest of their own electorates. And it's quite unfortunate. But anyways, I want to move on here to a very controversial problem I identify as, linked to the democratic problem we have in Africa. So I'm not the most religious person. I do not even subscribe to organized religion in many, many ways. So pardon me in advance, but I think religion and culture are two elements that have made our democracy so appalling in Africa. And ask me why. Well, I think because one, religion in Africa, particularly the Abrahamic religions, and I'm talking about Islam and Christianity, particularly here, they preach excessive submission. And in democracy, if you cannot stand up to question your elected representatives and you are being excessively submissive to the government, then that's a problem. So in West Africa, for instance, many of the cultures preach that we should respect our elders. Of course, many of the elected representatives are elderly people or elderly statesmen, as they like to be referred to. So if you have religion, Islam and Christianity saying that you must adore and respect your leaders, and you have cultures saying you must also respect your elected representatives or your leaders and look up to them and revere them. So do you think, or do you not think, those two elements, religion and culture, which of course are two of the strongest social elements in the African life, are contributing factors to the democratic problems we have in Africa? Free.
First, Ibrahim, I would like to understand if religion and our culture says we cannot dialogue with our elders, because that is part of the issue that I see in that allegation. Now, when we talk of a democracy, I elect you to office. In a real democracy, you are there to serve me. And once you serve me or serve me in the best interest of the people, then the people will submit. That is a true democracy. Maybe it is ideal democracy. But now, if you cannot serve the people who have elected you in office, and whenever there is a problem, then other problems emanate from it. So I would not want to, I'm also not a very religious person, so I don't know exactly the stipulations of fundamentalism in religion, but I would want to think that religion in itself is promoting cohesion amongst the people. Religion should be people must subscribe to tolerate one another, to live with one another, and to commune with one another. And if that kind of an idealistic society is created, then democracy should strive more. Instead of religion being a problem to the democratic process in Africa, I would expect religion to foster the democratic process in Africa. Maybe it's the reality on the ground, the case, but even in churches, I still say, I will take, for example, I will call myself a churchgoer. In my church, I still see people protest against the church leadership. So if we can do that in church, it means that the religion is not preventing us from protesting against our government or holding the government accountable. Why should we arrive at the point of protest? We shouldn't arrive at the point of protest if we want to hold the government accountable and the government is willing to listen to what we are discussing and dialogue and see how together we can force the democratic process in our individual countries. So that is my take on that issue.
But I'm gonna ask you guys this question, but I want to read two lines, one from the Bible, one from the Quran. So in Hebrew 13:17, the Bible says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls, as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that will be of no advantage to you." So in essence, the Bible is saying, obey your leaders and revere them. Okay, the Quran here, no, not even the Quran, the Hadiths, which are the sayings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of the Hadiths, I think collected by, I don't know who this collected, but anyway, the Hadith says, even if a slave were elected or appointed in charge over you and it leads you with the book of Allah, which is the Quran, you must listen and obey. Now, these are pointers to, to what I said earlier on. Both Christianity and Islam, very doctrinal religions, advocate that people, obey their leaders, who, of course, in Africa's case, are mostly elderly people. You must obey them and revere them. And as much as it advocates for obedience, it doesn't. Both books do not really advocate for questioning. I mean, some elements of questioning, but not as strongly as the advocate of obedience and submissiveness. And I'm saying this is one problem. So, Rejoice, do you see, Africans' excessive adherence to religion as a problem of our democracy?
Well, again, Ibrahim, once you operate at the extreme end of religion, extreme end of Islam, and the extreme end of Christianity, you begin to lose the essence of religion, because religion basically is meant to be a moral guideline in the way that humans coexist and behave. Of course, matters of salvation come in and so forth, and faith. But I still go back to the fact that, once you are coexisting in an environment where constitutionalism reigns supreme, where tolerance as free says, where multiplicity of beliefs is tolerated, religion does not become an obstacle. Now, obviously, the issue of obeying your leader is not about subservience, because imagine before 1980, we had a guy called Ian Smith who was running a very racial, administration and so forth. So he also had a constitution, the Constitution of Rhodesia. But what we simply did was we upheld the importance of our political rights, and we defied the constitution, and we disobeyed and disrespected him and took up arms against him. So sometimes it also depends on the way that you interpret the matters of religion. But I do agree with you, Ibrahim, to a certain extent that if you become too religious, you begin to see life on earth as a transient, era, and then you lose focus in terms of how to ensure that your life on earth becomes tolerable. So you need to be able to question leaders. I mean, I don't think leaders that are put in place by God to make them God. There's only one God. So I don't think that it's any violation when you begin to question your leaders using religious principles. But of course, you're right, reading from the New Testament and the writings of Paul, it comes in with a bit of contradictions and submissions of women and so forth. And I think it requires careful and articulate interpretation.
Right. You're absolutely right. I mean, from history, the Catholic Church really pursue that provision in the Bible that people must always obey their leaders during the 17th century to the 18th century, and of course Saudi Arabia today is living that reality that everybody must always obey the religious leaders. Of course, we've seen extremes in Iran and elsewhere. But anyway, I want to read some questions from you, some comments from YouTube. From Charles Owino, he says African countries have the best constitutions. The only problem is the implementation. I agree terribly. Do you guys really think African countries' constitutions are actually the best or actually they are great? Okay. We have another comment from Fashion Designing Company. It says, Mr. Charles, I agree with you. Many of these constitutions are well documented, but there's a big failure in the area of practicability. And from Formula Lagbegi, she says, it is true some constitutions are somewhat archaic. Amendments are needed in order to demonstrate representation and inclusivity of all people under this constitution. And Ibrahim Yasir, okay, he says from Nigeria. Anyway, I want to go to another line of question here, and I think in one of my conversations with Professor Aite, he often iterates in that. I mean, I think it's the last one I had with him last month. He was so strong about recommending new political alternatives to the current political structuring we have in Africa. And of course, Aite's political alternative are always, indigenous alternatives. Look inward, look at how African societies used to be before the advent of colonialism. From there, you can extract elements of democracy, elements of freedom, individualism, communalism, or some good economic and political practices that we can apply to our realities today in Africa. And I'm going to ask both of you, and including Aliu, if you are, can we call it indigenalist or something around that line? But my question again will be that, okay, we agree that democracy has, to a large extent, failed in Africa. So one, do we need new political structurings, maybe something alternative to democracy, or do we need to look inward and look at indigenous practices in Africa, in our kingdoms, to help us, lead this new crisis? Again, I want to remind everybody to please mute their audio so we can have a good conversation. Free, do you see any alternative to democracy, or will you go with the general alternative of Africans looking inward into our existing pre-colonial existing social structuring? But if you're going to go with the latter, I want you to have in mind the reality that many of those political structuring in ancient Oyo Empire, in ancient Dahomey, in ancient Kingdom of Ghana or Ouagadougou, that those realities may not necessarily be the same reality we are facing today. So if you're going to go with the idea of indigenizing, help us understand why you think those structuring will work, or do you think you have your own option or alternative to democracy free?
Okay. I'll start by saying that the present dispensation does not permit me to advocate for a return to, I would say, the ancient democracy. Because if you look at the ancient kingdoms, as you say, the boundaries are no longer the same. The structures are no longer what it used to be. So it will be overambitious for us to think that we should go back with the current republics to import what worked for the ancient kingdoms. I don't advocate for that. But there's one thing that Rejoice said that we should bear in mind. Why is it that we have adopted everything from the West with perfection except democracy? It means there is a possibility for us to adapt the democracy in Africa and have a real democracy in Africa. So what we need to do is look inwardly and honestly as to why the democracy is not working in Africa. One, we have identified some issues. We have identified the fact that we lack the political will to make the democracy work because our leaders are egoistic. We have identified that the current dispensation in terms of sociocultural setup is a little bit complex and must be put into the equation of making democracy work in Africa. We must take into consideration the rights of minorities in Africa. And must tell you, even in Western world where we have minority groups, we see what is happening in Europe. What happened in Europe and is still happening. There's protests from minority groups. So in our democracy, we should take into consideration our realities. But I still believe that we should think of adapting real democracy in Africa to work for the people. That is my take on democracy.
And that real democracy is still yet to be found. I want to read a few more comments. We have a lot of them.
We're still looking. It's a process.
Okay, we'll continue looking. Anyway, I want to read more comments from Zoom. We have a lot of them on Zoom here. Then I'm going to go to my last question. In my viewpoint, yes, from James, he says, in my viewpoint, democracy has more to do with the people than the elected. For instance, democracy ideally expects representation. Now, in a case where the structure or component of a workable democracy is not missing, do we blame democracy or the honors to achieving a democratic government? Interesting. This from Emmanuel Monina Farmer. He says, democracy means nothing to its citizens when their voices are not heard. Rights trampled on, denied their basic human amenities. Obviously, there is no option left but to protest and call for changes. Along the line, government uses veto power to fight against protests. Two more comments here from James. James says, at this point, we'll agree that whatever system of government employed will bring the same result. I think I agree with you. I mean, if you have a rotten system, there is, I don't think any reform will work if the system is not overhauled. It's just like some idiots telling us they are changing SARS to SWAT. It's like changing labels on a single, like on a drink. I mean, if somebody is stupid, he's stupid. You can't work that. And appreciation for Mr. Rejoice here. Great piece, Mr. Rejoice. That from Sharifatu Mohammed. And lastly, I'm going to read from Princess. She says, if the constitution should be amended, we should amend it. Isn't the same leadership that don't follow the constitution well enough to serve the people? That's absolutely right. So if we are actually going to advocate for constitutional changes, who should be the anchors or the drivers of those constitutional changes? Is it going to be the same absurd set of leaders we have that are going to mastermind this change? Absolutely not. And just keep those comments coming. I will read some if I can, but we have limited time here. I want to ask my last question. This is going to be about the next phase. Where should we go from here, or what do we go from here? Rejoice, and more. It has more to do with the alternatives to democracy, if you see anyone. But what do you think of Africa's democratic system or political system? after this, after 2020. Of course, life is not going to be the same again. Protests as elections do have consequences. So Rejoice, what do you make of Africa's democracy moving forward?
I think you put it well, Ibrahim, that perhaps just like economic models and everything else, like technology, we need to be in a space of innovation where we sit down as Africans. I want to challenge all the 70-odd young people that are on this platform, Ibrahim, that when we meet next year, let's meet with a new model of African governance. I mean, I think Freeze is right in the sense that democracy is about principles. There are certain fundamental institutional, pillars that we cannot dispense with. Freedom, property rights, constitutionalism, expression, and so on. So if we put these pillars aside and then we say, what kind of system of governance can we adopt as Africans? Shut out all the Western type of principles that have been thrust upon ourselves. Then we can be, because if we don't agree on the principles and the pillars, we cannot reinvent ourselves. It's almost like reinventing the cell phone. There are basic things that should maintain on the motherboard, Ibrahim, for your cell phone to work. It doesn't matter whether it's a 1965, whatever, or a 2025 version. There are certain specific things that remain on the motherboard. So the motherboard of democratic innovation must be agreed to. I want young people to sit down in the next LibertyCon conference to say, guys, we have spent the past 12 months reinventing ourselves as Africans. What we have been doing since the nationalist days doesn't seem to work. So let's take the principles, Ibrahim, and see if we can innovate around those principles. We will certainly be able to evolve something that is fresh, that is geared towards young people, because Africa is a continent of young people, something that is geared towards young people, that is progressive and sustainable.
Certainly, Rejoice. I mean, it keeps boggling my mind. Like, okay, so we can actually invent or innovate mobile phone. The mobile phone we use in 2001 isn't the same that we use in 2020. The cars we drove in 1999 isn't the same as we drove in 2019. If we can improve on technology, why can't we improve our political system? It's just absurd. But anyways, we're running out of time. I want to read more comments here that we close it. This is from Ibrahim Majalo. He says, I think in Africa, we are good in formulating constitutions that are not human-centered. They only protect those in power. Absolutely right. And also, I don't think we are having the right democracy that Africa needs. Up till now, it's difficult to hold our leaders accountable. 100%, brother. And here from Timothy, he says, protects allows the government that its activities are not in the interest of the citizens and therefore needs change. Absolutely. But most protests in Africa are politically championed from opposition parties, as I said, just to damage the reputation of the ruling government. Constitution is just a guiding principle. It will only take individual discipline. Here from Eric Modu, he says democracy is useless when power isn't implemented appropriately. And here from John Yangulu, he says democracy has been ill-managed in Africa. It has been manipulated and mixed with autocratic leadership. And lastly, from I'm going to read the last one here. There's still a lot on the Zoom section. You can read them, but I'm going to read the last one here from Moses Sinkala. He says, "Do you think Africa is ready to adopt real democracy?" I do not think so, but my guest think it's ready. Or it's time to look for alternative governance system that will favor citizens, prioritize limited government, and uphold liberties, and create a free society. Right. So, Free, if you want to give us a maybe 10 seconds closure, what's going to be your last word to the young individuals on this call right now in 20 seconds?
I'll just say democracy has not failed Africa. Our leaders have failed us. There is hope for true democracy in Africa.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Free. Thank you, Rejoice. Thank you, Aliu. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Itodo join us for the call. But again, this has been an amazing discussion. I want to implore everybody, if you are in Nigeria, go to the street. Keep on the voice in the street. Make your voice heard. This is the time to bring about holistic change. If you do not bring about the change now, it will not happen any other time. We are tired of our leaders telling us what to do. If they can't be responsible, then we're gonna remove them. We know they have their way with the election. They will always manipulate the election, but the protest is our own way of bringing about change. If election no go work, protest go work. Anyway, I want to encourage everybody to stay on the call and go to the next meeting. It's going to be a fantastic discussion with Linda Kavuka and some amazing individual. The topic is embracing a new world order post-COVID-19, the future of trade in Africa. And on that call, we're going to have Linda Kavuka, Levi Kodiwadi, Dennis Foretia, an amazing man, and Bruce Volion, Ntangi Bingura. And these are amazing individuals, friends of us at African Liberty and Student for Liberty Africa. Thank you again for joining us for this session, on this section of LibertyCon Africa. Keep the discussion going, and I will see you next time.
ugly. Sense. That hates me. They are keeping malice with me.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I just want to signal if our speakers on the call before we begin, Dennis Foresha, Levi, and Bruce, please let us know if you're on the call so that we begin. Thank you very much.
Dennis is here. Linda, Dennis is here.
Thank you, Dennis. Levi, are you on the call? Please say hello so that we know you're here. And also Bruce, let us know that you're on the call.
Levi's here as well.
Thank you very much, Levi. Bruce, please let us know if you're on the call so that we may begin.
Levi's here as well. Can you hear me, Linda?
Yes, Levi, we can hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So we're now waiting for our last speaker. Bruce, please let us know if you're on the call so that we may begin the conversation. Okay, I'm informed that all our speakers are on the call. So to our listeners, to our viewers, thank you very much for joining us for our inaugural LibertyCon Africa session. This panel is discussing the future of trade in Africa post-COVID-19, and we have amazing speakers lined up for you, Levi Kodiwade, Dennis Foresha, and Bruce Valiant. So I'm going to read just a summary of the profile of our speakers, and for the detailed profiles of our amazing speakers, please visit our website, www.libertyconafrica.com, and find out what they're up to. So Dr. Dennis Foresha is the co-chair of Dennis and Lenora Foresha Foundation and the executive chairman of Nkafu Policy Institute. This institute is a leading Cameroonian think tank that is based in Cameroon, and they are doing amazing work in the country. Dr. Foresha is also a surgeon by training, and he is a staunch believer and involved in philanthropic activities and issues related to international development. Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis, for being with us today. We also have Levi Kodiwade, who is the founder of Tuka Institute, a think tank advocating for citizen empowerment and regional integration in West Africa. Levi is an avid problem solver whose passion lies in unlocking Africa's potential. He has over 10 years experience tackling socioeconomic issues in Cotonou, Dakar, and Boston, all of which are cities that he has lived in. Thank you so much, Levi, for joining us today. And our last speaker is Bruce Wylang. He is the program manager at Great Lakes Center for Development and Enterprise, which is a free market-based think tank that is doing amazing projects in DRC, Burundi, and Rwanda. He has experience as an agent of change for action and armed violence to promote economic empowerment of young leaders of political parties and stop them from being used as agents of causing havoc and pain in the region, which you know has a lot of political instability and civil unrest. Thank you so much to all our speakers. If you could please put on your video so that we see you and our listeners and our viewers could be able to see you, we'll highly appreciate that.
Linda, I'll keep working on my video. It was working just well, but I'm going to make some changes.
Okay, thank you so much.
As we start.
But it is great to see you, sir. And I'll appreciate if Bruce does the same. So I'll go right into my first question. Now, the coronavirus pandemic got us it's a big blow to the entire world. And for us here in Africa, we are used to such issues being of the West, and they never trickle down to us. We just usually hear and never take them seriously. I am personally guilty of this. And I remember maybe sometime in 2019 reading about it, and I didn't really put much thought in it. And in January, when the cases began becoming much and people doing some sort of measures like sanitizers, especially in the airports, we thought that it would come and go and not get to us. But unfortunately, our world has been shaken harder than we have ever seen. Most of us have never experienced such a pandemic in our lives, or even our parents, and it's been a great shock, and even a bigger shock to our markets. So I personally think our case in Africa, the challenge to that has killed our economies is not so much the COVID-19 pandemic, but the measures that our states put in place and the way we handled the situation. But this is what I think. You may disagree with me. Do you think that there is hope for us? What kind of future can we expect in our economies? I will start with you, Dr. Foresha.
Hey, this is Levi. I can start. First of all,
thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this. It's been a pleasure to interact with your team and putting together such an amazing event, and that gathers everybody around this liberty and freedom movement. I will say yes, this has been a different pandemic. I mean, this has been, I will say, for most of the only global pandemics of our lives. So it is pretty hard it was hard from the beginning to predict whether everything will blow over very quickly, or if things will, continue for a while. I remember still in March, we were all expecting to, like that everything was going to take 8 weeks. We just was going to take, it was just going to go back to normal. I live in the US, and that at least that was the mentality. Even here in Africa being much more remote, and also the number of cases being so much smaller in Africa has made us downplay the effect on everything, and the effect on our daily lives, the effect on how we will interact with each other as participants of this global economy. In terms of future, I think, as it was blurry at the beginning of the pandemic, it is still a bit blurry as of now. However, I think the most, if anything it did to us, this pandemic, it made us more aware of our borders, because countries had to close their borders for a short or extended amount of time. And they had to take measures as individual countries rather than as region as a whole. So I think first, it made us more aware of how dependent or non-dependent we were of our borders in general. So I believe, at least in the first leg of the future, which is, I will say, in the first 2 years, we'll still be dealing with a lot of the repercussions of economic repercussion, meaning on how we are delivering health solutions to people in our communities, to how countries as a whole are handling the shock and managing the resources to make sure they are also responding to the donors, or we're in the middle of the debt crisis now. So I think we still have a long way to go into determining how states will be interacting in that way. But when it comes to trading between countries, I think first of all, the countries before who were very interconnected will go back to that initial state that they were in. because they'll realize how much they had missed that connection. The one that have not interacted in the past, it will take a lot of efforts, not just on the regulatory part, but also on the philosophy and how people think about trade and how people think about regional integration. It will take a lot for the continent, and because we're kind of also dividing in cluster, you have to remember that. So I'm going to speak a little bit more on the West Africa side. I think it's going to take a lot more time to recover. One example is the Nigerian Benin border that has been closed for a while now, more than a year. There were talks about reopening for a while, and it was supposed to be for a month, and I believe it's been for a year. And COVID-19 has even made that reopening process worse. And now we are transitioning into more of a coping mechanism where the economy is trying to figure out how, countries are trying to figure out how to do without their neighbors, which is a little bit, for free trade and free trade advocates is a little bit, I'll say, stressful for us. But I think it will depend on the amount of effort that we put into pressing for the importance of regional integration and regional trade. I think I went a little over, Linda. I will do better.
It's fine. Thank you. Dr. Faurecia, thank you so much. Dr. Faurecia, we're just discussing how the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken up the world order, but for us in Africa, this is usually the kind of things that doesn't get to us, but unfortunately this time we are also part of experiencing the pandemic and how it has shaken up our economy that is on the ground right now. So I was saying that, in my opinion, I think that the measures of our states in handling the situation is more to be blamed for the current breakdown of our economies and supply chains than the pandemic itself. And so I was asking whether there is hope for us, what kind of future should we expect moving forward in terms of, trading in Africa?
Thank you very much, Linda. But I am coming on with my phone, so you all can activate it. It shows up as Dennis. The video can be activated when you are ready. Well, thank you very much for that. And one of the things that I would say very quickly off the bat is a lot of us. Pretty much not every country was grappling with trying to understand COVID-19. So I'm not going to blame our governments as much because in speaking with folks at the Africa CDC, there was a lot of uncertainty regarding how to deal with COVID back in March. I remember we closed our offices in March 14th or 15th, one of those days, because of the uncertainty that's there. And granted, to me, the responses from our governments have been a reflection of the current challenges that we have. The current challenges that we have as a continent, the limitations within our various countries to deal with emergencies. And so that is what prompted a lot of their response. The lockdowns, at the time of the lockdown, implementing the lockdown, it was the only thing that had been shown to mitigate the spread. So in hindsight, I am not going to really fault them as much. But I think what COVID is showing or has shown us is that we have to build resilient economies, and resilient economies are only built if societies are free and democratic. And I think, to me, that is the overall takeaway from what COVID-19 is teaching us. A lot of the countries that are open free, except for the United States or so, have really dealt with COVID a lot more, or their economies have been a lot more resilient. Even countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana, and many other countries, because of their openness, have been much more resilient and be able to support their citizens more than others. But I think it's your assessment that our measures was more devastating is debatable. So I think we would have a very long debate on this today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faurecia. And Bruce, please let us know if you can hear us. I understand you're having a bit of some challenges on your end, but let me know if you can hear us, and please, we would like to hear your thoughts on the future we can expect post-COVID-19. Okay, so I'll just jump into the next question. Unfortunately, I believe he's having internet challenges. So during the past few months, something has come out, one of the things that has come out very strong is e-commerce. And I think if you just look at our operations, even in government and in the private sector, we really do not give e-commerce that much attention. It used to be something that you have as an addition to your operation or your business, but it wasn't really a core focus of operations or even programs like government programs. So, you know, most businesses have been caught up, and you know, if people didn't even know what Zoom was, but today Zoom has become an asset, like having internet that you must have, or even finding out that there is something called Google Meet. Like Google has an option of meeting, and you know, Microsoft also has an option. Skype, unfortunately, has had greater competitors that has died away. But now, you know, people who are studying online, like myself, you know, those are certificates people were taking for granted as fake. But now this is the channel that we're using for our day-to-day businesses and moving, and people are making money out of it. But you know, our companies have not been very prepared. The few that were prepared have been able to make money and maintain their operations. And when the majority which were not prepared, or even having logistic services like delivery services, you know, online platforms and all that, they've died down. And right now there's so much loss. So now that we have been awakened, what can you say is the role of e-commerce in our current African markets, putting in mind the gaps that we have in technology and also electricity? So I'll start with you, Dr. Dennis.
Well, thank you very much, Linda, for that. And I think you are 100% correct. To me, COVID has been one of the major disruptors, at least in the 21st century. It would rank as probably one of the major disruptors of the world, because it has really forced the world and folks to react in ways that we didn't really even, you know, could imagine. And as you said, e-commerce is one of them. But you know, if you look at it, the way COVID is disrupting, you know, things, it is disrupting not only in the way, you know, people plan and think of the future, but it's disrupting in very fundamental ways. For example, folks can actually now start thinking of how you know, you go to school and making mainstream, where even from secondary school or high school, you can pretty much go to school and have very reputable diplomas, like you mentioned, without really necessarily being at the four corners of a classroom for, you know, for any prolonged period of time. So education is being disrupted. Service industry is being disrupted. This normally would have been a physical conference where we would be somewhere in Abuja, in Dakar, or in Joburg or somewhere, and we'll be meeting physically. And so, you know, the post-COVID world, the post-COVID era is going to have a lot of this, you know, carry forward, whether we like it or not. So you are completely correct regarding e-commerce, and I think that e-commerce is only going to increase in sub-Saharan Africa, because the value chains are going to respond, to the changes that are happening structurally, and our governments are going to be forced, to create space for e-commerce. For example, in Cameroon right now, there's a whole issue of tax collection, and one of there is internet taxes in many sub-Saharan African countries. And one thing that's for sure is that within the CEMAC region currently, mobile money is not considered a formal way of making payments. So the Cameroon government wants to collect taxes, and it wants to collect taxes through mobile money, but it then comes to realize that it does not recognize mobile money as a legitimate tender. Doesn't recognize mobile money from MTN, from Orange, or from all these other telephonic operators as real tender. So it has to go back to the drawing board and integrate this, and this is going to push more governments in the post-COVID era to adjust. One more comment is the companies that are going to survive, because as I said, we all agree, COVID is a major disruptor across just every sector. The companies that are going to survive are the ones that are willing to remake themselves, and remake themselves very quickly. Now, there's an element of how strong financially companies were before the pandemic to be able to take advantage and remake themselves. So you would see a lot of, which we've already seen, a lot of small businesses fold, but in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the informality continues. But it will be, there is increasingly more space for the e-commerce aspect that you're referring to, to flourish. So I'll end there for now.
Thank you very much. And Levi, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, and I think you were spot on. First of all, choosing e-commerce because of all the markets losers, there have been winners, and I think e-commerce is one of them. In terms of how we are being impacted by this pandemic, first of all, I think pre-COVID, internet companies, especially the startups in Africa, were struggling with, I would say, 2 to 3 things. One is their addressable markets. People who are technology savvy enough to access an app, to call a ride or order food, etc. 2, it was also regulations, because there was no actual, because of the lack of regulation and because of how new those startups were, there was no interpretation of the law that pertained to them. And that gave them, that exposed them to the risk of being shut down if special interests were pressing to shut down the competition from smaller startups. But now you have on one side these companies that will have a more addressable market now. We have been forced to go online. We have been, everybody who was kind of kicking the can down the road and saying, well, we'll do this digital transformation later, had to do it. So all of a sudden they have a more expandable market. And as Dr. Dennis was saying, the addressable markets will, as the addressable market expands, there will be more and more actors that will penetrate it, more startups that will come on. And I think that is good news for that one sector. However, COVID-19 has impacted spending in general, right? It's one thing to have people who can now order online and with their phone who are more tech savvy. It's another thing to have people who are willing to spend on those goods and services. So I think, and that will take some time. I think the strategy of some of those startups is, wait until build their platform and making the cost, some of their customers who are more tech savvy and who have the resources take this kind of downturn to expand and expand not just the services, but expand their functionalities, technology for functionalities for now. And then, when more people will have the means to order food or order something online, those will come in. Another side of e-commerce is the supply chain side, right? And how, because if you have an online store, you also have to have everybody, your product and services that are being provided have to be in order. And there has been a supply chain shock right at the beginning of COVID when everything was running out. And but now it has stabilized a little more, and people are more able to, e-commerce actors are more able to deliver on those promises, which is great. So yes, e-commerce, we are hoping that in the next few years, we can have more businesses that go that route, that will force regulation to go in their way, that will force the ecosystem to shift more to an online base. And we also hope that governments will be responsive, and we'll basically have no choice, right? Because we have this environment that we have this pandemic that pushed us in this era, and all you have to do right now is react to that. And we are no longer leaving it up to them. The population has moved, the customer habits have moved, and regulation will just have to follow.
Thank you so much, Levi, for your amazing submission. So I would like to move to another direction, but still related with e-commerce. And so the African Continental Free Trade Area is here. And obviously for those of us who are staunch believers of free markets, we are very excited that finally, there is the potential of us having cross-border trade, a common market, which means bigger targets and bigger customers for everyone who's in business, and potential to grow, and just so many potentials of industries, growth, innovations, and which obviously translates to thousands or millions of jobs for our people. However, at the moment, only 30 have ratified the agreement. Most have signed it, but 30 have ratified, which means adopting the agreement to their domestic laws. And as they have ratified it, the delivery of the ratification documents is still pending, like proof of them having adopted the law into domestic law and taking this to the African Union. If you review the history of African countries, which are grouped into regional economic blocs like the East African Community, the ECOWAS, the SADC, COMESA, we are used to seeing some political silent wars between the presidents, which often affect business. Like the other day, the Rwanda-Uganda border is closed because of one issue or the other, but it is the traders who are going to face such challenges. Or all of a sudden we hear that the import of sugar is banned from Uganda into Kenya, where the product is like limited. So at the moment right now, because of infrastructure, we don't have a connection between the east and the western part of the continent. And if you look at these two regions, each have their own unique products and minerals and all of that. For example, East Africa is home of world-class tea, world-class coffee, horticulture, and greens. And the West African region is where you get cocoa, you get shea butter, there's a lot of gold there, and yams, which do not exist in this other side. But we currently are not able to trade with each other because there is no road route to pass through, which you need to pass through Congo. And if you are to fly your products, for example, if you are to bring in the best Ankara fabrics from the West into East Africa, you have to pay heavy taxes for you to get them flown over because, the ocean way is too long. So this is one. And also we know African countries are notorious for ignoring international agreements. We have them, like the human rights charters. All of us have them adopted in our constitutions, but the implementation, the reality is police brutality and other kinds of human rights atrocities. So will this amazing idea of having Africa's novel common market work, as they're saying it will come operational in January 2021. So will it actually work practically on ground, or is this dream far-fetched? I'm curious to hear what you think.
Linda, thank you for that. And that's a very provocative question, for sure. And you can either have one of two takes. You can either be pessimistic or you can be optimistic. And I am an optimist. And I also believe, like Thomas Jefferson had said, that it is very important to recognize tangible progress when it happens. And I think it was a major feat. Africans, they're similar, but at the same time they bicker a lot, as you said. So it's very hard to see all 55 countries agree in principle on something like trade and trade liberalization, creating a common market. So the act of actually having a continental level agreement and steps in place, to implement, whether the implementation is 50%, 100%, 70% or so, is a different question altogether. But I think the adoption of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is a very, very tangible one, and one that free marketers should applaud because of its inherent benefits and everything. Now, the agreement calls for, over the next 5 years or so, once it's implemented, a reduction in tariffs by about 90%, non-tariff barriers to also be phased out, and for an agreement to be signed with the various countries regarding how you implement trade. Your main question regarding whether one should be hopeful is that I think we should be hopeful regarding this agreement. One, because the alternative is not just appealing. Let's remember that between 1996 and 2017, the percentage of exports, African exports that was intra-African, rose by only about 7%, from 10% to 17%. And today, only about 17% of all African exports is intra-African, and therefore the notion that the barriers will be broken, as we all want, there is. The projections are that it would increase employment, it will make businesses stronger and create opportunities, and also increase African exports externally, so outside Africa. So there are all good things there. The reality is that we have to, at the continental level and at AU level, regarding this is a long-term agreement, and the Secretariat was just inaugurated in Accra, I think last month or a couple of months ago. There would need to be a mechanism to ensure that the engagement is sustained, and it's not only sustained based on the will of whoever the AU president is for that given year, or the AU secretary is, the AU commissioner is. So I think overall, I am hopeful for it. There are many pluses to it with very little negatives. The estimate is that taxation revenue for countries will not really change significantly. At most, it will drop by 0.5 or so percentage points. So we have to be at the forefront of really advocating for this, really pushing that our government implement it, and actually creating mechanisms to hold our government accountable in the implementation process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dennis, for your detailed response. To our audience, please, you're welcome to type your questions out on the chat box. So, Levi, what do you think about the Continental Free Trade Area?
Yeah, before Dr. Dennis talk about optimistic and pessimistic, he kind of called me out a little bit, and I did a little introspection of, am I more of a pessimistic or optimistic? My experience makes me a little bit of a pessimistic, because my country is right next to Nigeria. We are part of ECOWAS. Yes, yet our border is closed. It has been closed, even though there is an existing and pretty well functioning free trade agreement and free circulation of people. So it's tricky. I think I believe at the end of the day, what will really trigger action so that we go from just signing or expressing interest to actually implementing those policies will be incentive. And the question that we'll have to ask ourselves as free marketeer and people who advocate this, who want this to happen. And yes, Dr. Dennis, it's a great thing that this happened, right? This is a good start. It might not be even close to what we want. And as you mentioned, Linda, there's still a lot of infrastructure barrier for that to effectively happen. But going back to the incentive, I think what can really trigger implementation is the incentive. What are governments right now incentivized to do for trade in general, right? What triggers government action? Is it, unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with what their donors care about and how they can reflect the donors' interest, and how they can reflect their donors' value, and how they can reflect their donors' criteria. So, and a lot of their donors come from countries that have free trade. A lot of their donors believe in free trade and have implemented those policies. So maybe the advocacy advocacy strategy to push that is, yes, being on the ground and making sure that people understand how important it is and how they can motivate the politician to buy into those agreements. And also, on a more international scale, see how we can expand our advocacy to those institutions that our government seem to care about more in terms of how much they can contribute and how they can help them deliver on the political agenda or the development agenda. So just to give a straight answer, it's a good start. About the future, I'm not too sure. And COVID-19 has definitely impacted a lot of, the action and slowed down a lot of the action. And to tell you a little bit about West Africa, again, we have this, Francophone West Africa in general, we have this, we were supposed to switch currencies from the franc to another currency, and there was a treaty signed last year, and everything was supposed to go into effect July of this year. There's still nothing done on that point because COVID has brought a lot more in. So our role is, I'll wrap up with this, our role is, one, identify the incentive that will trigger government action, and two, bring this to the public debate, right? So the public debate is right now still recouping, for the right reason from COVID-19, and our role is also to make sure that we bring this back to the table. Otherwise, it will just be something that was hip for a little bit and now kind of die down.
Thank you very much for your detailed submission. So my master's research was on this agreement, so I'm really rooting for it. But being born in Africa and seeing what you've seen and what you've experienced, I cannot help it. But maybe it's PTSD of thinking of how we just ignore police brutality, we ignore human rights. In the Eastern African community, actually, there's a lot of plans, and I know even in ECOWAS, to have a unified currency, to have unified systems in school so that people are able to move around, but they all end up in paper. So let's see how it goes. I would like to jump into the questions that our audience are asking. And the first is from Richard, who asks, in order to enhance the power of local African currencies, wouldn't it be an option if tariffs are increased for goods coming in from outside and reduced for those going out of the continent? What do you think about it?
I think that I am not a big fan of tariff wars. So I think there is sufficient evidence to demonstrate that in the long term they are not helpful. They are not as helpful as we would think in making enterprises stronger, 2, creating jobs, and 3, lifting people out of poverty. So that degree of intervention in the economy is not something that I would normally support for it. I think the greater to me, when I look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and I look at it and I say, okay, what is it trying to solve? It is trying to allow people who have who are producing businesses that are currently productive, that have goods to sell, for them to be able to sell it to a larger market with minimize expenses. I think that's what it's trying to do. Now, the process of actually, selling your goods, let's say for us in Cameroon, accessing the Nigerian market of, 200 million. That entails that I have a certain degree of capital to be able to take on that, to be able to, to do that. I may be struggling to sell to Europe or so, but if I am able to generate capital, which is usually one of the major issues that our SMEs and medium enterprises and large enterprises face, if I'm able to do that, then I can really, really take advantage of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, I think the most fundamental problem with all of this is that we in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have too much debt capital. We have too much debt capital. It's estimated, I think PwC did a study 2 years ago, last year, estimating the amount of debt capital in Nigeria. And it was estimated that in Nigeria, $1 trillion is in debt capital. We cannot leverage. And we see this all around because we have Africans own property, they own land, but they cannot monetize it. They cannot, you have a small business owner who owns his or her house, but cannot, and that house may be worth, let's say, $10,000, but they cannot actually get a loan for $1,000 for whatever business operations they're trying to do. We do not have a system of actually ensuring that property rights are actually easily titled to be able to monetize, to be able to bring this dead capital into life. And I think that to me is really one of the most fundamental issues that we have to fight, or we have to work to be able to create the kinds of free societies that we are talking about, and also societies that can create jobs for themselves. One of the things that COVID tells us is that we know that insecurity is going to increase. We see that in Nigeria, we see that in Cameroon, we see that in many sub-Saharan African countries, because if we don't have a dynamic economy, we are not able to allow young people to be able to maximize their potential and be able to create jobs for themselves. They are not depending on government for it. So I think fundamentally, in order for us to really take advantage of this, we have to be able to look into how we do what Hernando de Soto has said, how we bring dead capital into life. And if we are able to do that, we are going to be able to have, it's to me the fundamental domestic resource mobilization that allows us to capitalize our small businesses, ensuring that they are able to hire more people and be able to now expand from Douala to Abuja, to Lagos, to Nairobi and all of that, and actually, create the kinds of systems and economies that we are all dreaming about.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask the next question to Levi. And Patrick here is asking, how can we create an environment where free trade is more developmental, more inclusive, and more beneficial, considering that African countries and our economies have been severely weakened by the COVID-19 pandemic because of the policy. So he's just asking, how can we, moving forward, create opportunities for our small businesses or entrepreneurs to benefit from free trade? Levi, please.
Yeah, I think that's like $100 million question, because I mean, this is what we hope for, right? Like fostering an environment that makes it that incentivize innovation in general. I would say one of the things that I tend to worry a lot about in how we are fostering such an environment. I think one is figuring out how to bring in more the informal market to more formal sector. Because right now there is a very good amount of addressable market that is informal and not accounted for because they do not have the incentive, again, to be formal. And that reduces the scale, that reduces how they operate business, that reduces a lot of how, that reduces what we also call addressable markets. So I think what will be key, and also because they have been impacted a lot by COVID-19, they most likely do not have the reserves, or they cannot live day by day. They don't have large reserve to cover, months and months of operation. So if anybody goes out of business, it will be for them, right? So first of all, I think it will be to figure out a framework that includes them more into the formal economy, incentivize them to get into the formal economy. And then we will have a more uniform market where we're able to compare, one-on-one. Because right now we have some big businesses. When we do our market sizing exercise, right, we look at formal businesses because they are the ones that are accounted for. They're the ones we can find data for. When you have a lot of the population in the informal sector, first, you're not able to account for them properly. Second, you're not able to make sure that they have, you're not able to measure inflation the right way, because those people can only be market takers, and the kind of the extent to what which they can be market maker is limited. And that also kind of spreads them out a lot. Like they have to they cannot form a big unit to be addressed. So I think it will be a lot about how we, in your opinion, I think it will be a lot about how we incorporate them in our global economy, or not global economy, but our country's economy in the formal sector.
Thank you very much. So our time has run out so much, but I have one last question, and I'll give each of you a minute, starting with Dennis. So, Moses here is telling us that before COVID-19, most African economies were weak anyway. So the pandemic just, maybe showed us, maximized the weaknesses of these African economies. Moving forward, what is your suggestion on ways that Africa can make its economies self-sustaining? You have 1 minute each to respond. Like, how can we make our economies more self-sustaining? Because now we are so dependent on aid, we are so dependent on support. This past few months, you've just seen how African countries have been begging for aid for Corona that has ended up in people's pockets. So, for us, the local people here, how do we contribute to making our African economies more self-sustainable?
So to me, Linda, it's very simple. It's very simple. One is that, it has to be open. It has to be open. Innovation does not happen in societies that are closed. There's a reason why a lot of innovation happens in free societies. So if we want to be able to get our countries, because just think about the innovation in Lagos. But innovation in Lagos, they are trying to do Uber in Lagos, but they are not allowing that to happen, right? So that innovation is killed in Lagos because of the monopolies that are there. So if you want to actually have systems that are like, to really, you have to free the economy that people can come, they have a fair shake, they have a legal system that everybody is going to be accountable for, and now they can innovate. If you do that, we will be resistant, we will be resilient as a people and as countries, and we'll be able to be more competitive. We would ensure that our land and property rights are equitably, adjudicated in front of law, and everybody will be able to maximize their own resources and be able to look for other resources to be able to, better themselves and also better their communities.
Thank you so much. Levi, real quick, what is your opinion?
Yeah, I'll say one, we'll have to, yes, the free society is definitely the way to go. I think, especially for what I said, I was saying Francophone West Africa, we have this concentrated delivery of development that is sitting in one hand of the government, and the government has failed multiple times to partner with the private sector into delivering development. So right now, I think what will really enable the future is make sure we foster that relationship and make sure that in its structure, the governments around Africa have a framework where they are one, incentivized, and two, so a little bit forced to employ other private sector actors to deliver on development, because the innovation will come, the free market will just have the juices flowing for the economy, but we really need to demonopolize the way development is currently delivered, because if it stays in one hand and everybody is not included, we'll still struggle for a while.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the amazing conversation we've had. It's been really interesting. And maybe in a few seconds, what is your final words for this session, like the future of trade for Africa? Your final words, please.
I think the trends show that the trade, intra-African trade will increase, and I think it will. The greatest folks who have been lifted out of poverty is where there is trade, where folks are able to really access goods from different areas. So that's what really leads to people being raised out of poverty. So I think the future is we are going to continue to make progress, and conversations like this are what we need.
Thank you so much. Levy, your final words.
I would say, I think overall, I may not be too optimistic about how government will develop, will deliver development. I am, however, very optimistic about the youth. I'm very optimistic about the big population that is coming. I'm very optimistic about how they are thinking. I'm very optimistic about the amount of information that they have out there and how they are able to act upon. I believe they have a more global mindset that will enable free markets in general. So I think, the next generation, and I'm talking about us, I'm talking about people who are younger, and which luckily constitute such an explosive part of our population in Africa. I believe they will do a lot, and I believe with the right environment, they will change and push things and give really no choice but for a freer society.
Thank you so much, Levy, Kedowide, and Dr. Dennis Foreshia for speaking to us today about the future of trade post-COVID-19. This has been an amazing session and a wonderful day. Thank you so very much. To our listeners and viewers, we continue tomorrow for the last day of our LibertyCon Africa conference, and we shall be featuring panels on the quick money generation, which you do not want to miss. And the last one will be on the increased rape cases during this COVID-19 pandemic. Masal khairi to all of you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.